the Not Safe for Work romance podcast where authors take you behind the scenes in our little corner of the romance writing world. I'm Eris Adderley.
And I'm Shane Starrett, and we write the kind of books that embarrass you in front of your relatives.
Our episode today, You're Not the Boss of Me, Characters versus Authors, and Who's Really in Charge, where we'll be talking about those characters we create, hearing them in our heads, and whether that's proof we're insane, and how to get down on paper the stories they insist on telling us the way they want us to.
So, Eris.
Yes, Mr. Shane.
2021, we're here.
Yes, if you're listening to this podcast, we have survived 2020, and it is 2021.
Yes, and thank God 2020 could not be in my rearview mirror fast enough.
I'm pretty sure it was 117 months long.
Yeah, I agree. It totally was not a normal year by any metric, and that includes the number of months that were in it. Easily 117, if not more. Not only that, but it was one of those years that you could truly say was for the record books.
Yeah, I feel like they're going to be, you could take like a semester in college, like 30 years from now, you could take a semester in college on 2020 the way you could probably take one on like 1348 or something.
Yeah, no, grad paper is going to be written about this year.
Another plague year, I might add.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it will be comparable to the Spanish influenza, which was, I believe, 1919, I think, or 1918. Yeah, I mean...
no one expects the Spanish influenza.
That's right. That's right. And no one expected COVID-19. And certainly not for it to have lasted as long as it did. But you know what? We're through it. We made it. There was some good that came out of 2020. We started our podcast.
Yes, that was great.
Yes, it was. And
especially because we started the idea of the podcast in 2019. So.
Yeah, that's right. You approached me in 2019 about it. And it wasn't until 2020 that we actually got off our asses and started putting things together, and then actually recorded our first 3 episodes.
I am definitely the tortoise and not the hare.
I wasn't exactly moving at lightning speed myself.
A lot was going on.
Yeah. So our subject tonight, You're Not the Boss of Me, characters versus authors. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yes, how do you see your characters? And you know, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I can hear my characters' voices in my head." Do you hear that?
Yeah. So much like our last episode where we talked about, our voice in terms of the way we write, the characters that I write I'm one of those people that do actually hear the characters talking in my head. I hear their voices. I write them in my voice, but I hear their voices. In fact, that's important to me because it helps me ground them in who they are, as opposed to just, I don't know how to put it, just being random voices or generic cardboard cutout people. You know, it's for me as a writer, I'm not just holding up Barbie and G.I. Joe and having them, talk to each other in the same voice like a child. Every one of my characters has a very distinctive voice. And I do, in fact, I don't want to say physically hear them, but I hear them in the sense that when they start talking to me, when they start telling their story, they do it themselves in a very distinctive voice. And that's what I then try, to the best of my ability, to put down on paper. It's interesting. There was recently a online discussion that you were participating in, and you kind of called me out. You said, "Oh, Shane Starrett is one of those authors who can write both male and female POV." I know the thread was mostly about POV, but you specifically mentioned his characters have distinctive voices, whether they're male or female, and they sound realistic, which of course,
yes, they do.
I preened a little bit about that because I'm kind of proud of that. I mean, to me, that was a very, very, very high compliment. But I do hear both my male characters and my female characters' voices very distinctively. And that's, I feel like that sometimes works to my advantage more so than I think it might work to other authors. I don't know, maybe other authors struggle with it more, but I really do find that my female characters speak to me with as distinct a voice as male characters. And I don't
And
know.
I would say, as someone who has read, as a person on the receiving end of your books, um, you you can tell when a writer is treating a gender as a. Did you ever see the movie Orgasmo a long
Yeah.
time ago?
Yeah.
As a stunt cock or
Right.
pussy, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like you can tell when the person is just there to be the object of the main character's love or lust or whatever, and you do not do that. But you know what I mean? Like you're both characters, but I think the romance genre is a bit hypercritical of male writers. And so they're looking harder at how you write a woman than they would look at how I write a woman. But you as I know you as a human being, that our conversations we've had just as friends, I know that you think of women as people and not an object or not a archetype or a role. You know what I mean? So I think
Yes.
that comes through when you're writing your characters, is because you're in the mind of a just a human, not like, oh, I've got to think of what a woman would say and write that, and like what do women think, as though women are like just this homogenous, unit of thought.
Yeah. And they all think the same way. So I have to get in the woman's mindset because they don't think like men do. And it was funny because in that article or in that thread that we were both participating in, it was the exact opposite. The complaint is that women weren't writing men.
Correct.
And
And I mean, I will say that I have read some things where I don't like to assign to people gender roles, but I do feel like the thing I just said before, that sometimes I feel like the author was treating the male love interest as the stunt cock, like it was a wish fulfillment character. It wasn't like, I don't know. I'm not trying to. It didn't feel like we were trying to delve real hard into someone's persona and thoughts. It was like I'm fantasizing about what my ideal partner would be like, and then I'm gonna write that this person does those things.
yeah,
Which again, I get it. That's part of what romance is some fantasy fulfillment. So like I get it, but there's still other parts of me that kind of it grates against, because I'm just like, but the whole character cannot be wish fulfillment. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
there's got to be some things that the person does that rub you the wrong way or something. Something.
right.
Come on.
They have to be human. They have to
Right.
exhibit human tendencies that every human, and notice I'm not gendering here, because I think that's part of the thing that has always bothered me. And honestly, it did bother me a lot more from male writers writing women than it has from women writers writing male, is that they do tend to write them as wish fulfillment characters. And we've seen these threads before where there's ones that go around where they've clipped pieces out of a male writer writing about a woman or from a
Hmm.
woman's perspective, and how, I hate to say this, how comical it sounds sometimes, or downright misogynistic in the
Right. And
worst.
I mean, I will say I've seen those excerpts, not all of them, but a lot of them are like older books
True.
being written by a person who was older at the time. So it's like some of it we're kind of looking at some generational growth that's happening. I'm not trying to
Yes,
pick on anything generational, but I mean, the conversation about women is evolving. So,
that's
um,
all
but in
true.
a lot of times, or very rarely, are those quotes from romances.
No,
A lot of times they're from literary fiction, and there is a lot of, again, women as props for the main character to have some sort of experience on his journey.
right. And I don't even want to get into what's been going on right this past week with the whole conversation regarding Dr. Jill Biden as
Oh, good
opposed.
gravy.
Yeah. But it's the same mindset that creates those kinds of situations where male writers and female writers writing the male perspective take that kind of approach to it, is unfortunately in some instances the same one kind of mindset that created that whole situation with, the condescending pat on the head.
The kiddo.
Yeah, the kiddo.
That's
Thank
the
you.
worst.
Yeah, yeah.
And I will say there's the opposite of wish fulfillment. This same thing goes on when I think authors also will have a character that is like, I'm just going to call it grudge fulfillment. Like, I wrote this archetype of maybe it might be the villain or whatever, but like, I wrote this archetype of a person to like get out my grudges on people who are a way that I don't like.
Right. And that's true. So
you see that in romances written by women a lot, because there'll be like the hero's ex that's like every bitch stereotype. Like the hero's ex is never just like a normal person and they broke up just because of like the weird reasons. She's always like this awful conniving bitch who's trying to like undercut the heroine and get him back and ruin his life and all that. Like, she's never just like, here's my ex Michelle, and we broke up because her career had her moving to Toledo and I didn't want to move there. Like, no one ever just breaks up for like a normal reason. Like the ex is always like some archetypal, horrifying person.
Right. She's a mean girl. She's always she's got always an ulterior motive.
And the same with the ex, boyfriend or husband or whatever.
Right.
And I'm sure if I think about my stuff, I'm guilty of that somewhere.
No, come on. In any of the things that we've ever talked about, we ourselves are always capable of being guilty of those kinds of things. We fall into those traps. It's sometimes very easy to do. But that doesn't mean that we write all the time that way.
We're trying not to. We're cognizant and trying to make an effort, I would hope.
Right. So I want to hear about you and your characters and how you hear them or don't hear them, if you don't, in your head.
I've thought about this actually many times whenever this discussion comes up about hearing the voices. I can't decide whether I'm hearing the voices or not. Like, that sounds a weird thing to say. I definitely know... I know what a character sounds like, and by that I mean thematically, if that makes any sense. I don't know that I have an exact voice in my head. Like, it's not like I'm hearing another person talk to me with a distinct voice. How, like, if I were to pick up the phone and hear you, I would go, oh, that's Shane, I know his voice. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, I don't know that I hear a specific sounding voice, but, like, as a concept, I know what that character feels and sounds. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, as a concept, I understand what they sound like, but I don't hear them like talking words to me. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It's interesting though, because what you're describing sounds very different than what I was hoping that I was describing. So when you're writing, if I'm understanding correctly, you don't necessarily, and now I'm going to say, I hope this makes sense. Tonally, you don't hear their voice tonally.
I don't hear an exact voice. I mean,
okay.
I'm trying to think of an example, but it's like if, you've got some villainous character, I have a sense of their speaking style. Like, I definitely know they're gonna, if a character has a gravelly voice, I know what that is supposed to sound like, and therefore when I'm thinking this dialogue, what's good dialogue for this? When I'm thinking of that informs what, comes out, because you can't imagine a person with X kind of voice,
right?
Saying certain things. Like, it's, certain dialogue does not match certain voices. So it's like, I have a sense of how they sound, but it's not like I hear them talking to me in my head, I guess.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. When you're writing and you're having to convey the voice of those characters, in your head, or the concept of them, and transfer that into narrative to convey that to the reader, talk to me about how you do that. If you're not actually hearing a voice, or how are you then interpreting it in such a way that you would hope the reader will understand that he has a gravelly voice? And please, don't just tell me I write, he has a gravelly voice.
I mean, that has happened. I mean, not in that language, but yes. I mean, I will kind of, if a person has a distinctive voice, I might put that in the first time they talk, just get that out of the way so people are having that in their head. Because, as I was saying, because I have a sense of, I don't know I don't know. Like, you ever meet someone for the first time and you just get a vibe off of them? Like, you don't really know them, but you get like, the person just rubs you the wrong way, or
Hmm.
you're like, I could be best friends with this person, or something, or this
Right.
person's a snob. You know what I mean? Like, just from talking to him for 5 minutes, you just get a whole vibe, right?
Right.
In So in my head, when the characters start out of wherever they start out of, it's like that, and I think I don't know which is the cause and which is the effect. Like, I don't know which position things are in, but I don't know if you know that, if you've heard that, like, people will say some authors are more character driven and some authors are more plot driven.
Yes.
And I definitely think I'm probably a more plot driven author. So I usually have my idea for what is going to happen to people, and then the types of people and their personalities and their whole vibe, as the term I'm using, I can't think of what else to call it, comes after usually.
Interesting.
And so, but in my head, it's just like a catalog of concepts for this person. Like, when I'm writing Medusa, I do know generally how she sounds when she talks. I know what she looks like when she moves, like the types of movements she makes. I mean, the types of decisions she makes, the way she thinks about things. Like, it starts to develop in like a little organic, I don't know what, growth of stuff.
Right.
I'm good at doing it, not good at talking about it. But it happens after. Like, my initial idea is, here's the plot. I want to take Medusa and have her as a romantic heroine. Well, Perseus was supposed to kill her. What if I make him fall in love with her? Well, how are we going to do that? And then the plot begins growing out of there. And like, once I have the plot pretty well, a lot of times the characters start kind of fleshing themselves out while I'm plotting. Like, I start getting a
Oh,
sense of their personalities as I plot, especially based on the types of things I wish this character to do. So it's like, then I'm like, well, if I want to make, you know, not too spoilery, I think it's pretty obvious in any of the promotional stuff I've put or quotes I put that Perseus is a male sub.
right.
It's like, if that's going to be the case, then I need him to make certain types of decisions. And what's his personality going to be to allow him to both be the badass I want him to be, but also submissive to Medusa in those kind of situations? And so it's like, that starts informing what kind of personality I think he has. And then when I get to writing the scenes, then that information is then informing like the kinds of things he says in response to people and the kind of, inner thoughts that he has about situations.
Okay. Two things here, though. I'm going to interrupt for a second. One, I cannot tell you how delicious it sounds to hear you
Aw.
describing both of those characters
Aw.
and
Well,
knowing that
hopefully,
that
I swear, I'm actually writing at a good clip for me recently, so hopefully it
I
will
know
get done in the early part of 2021.
I am so looking forward to that. But you used a term and you said organically while
Hmm.
you're writing, which I think is interesting to me because you have said time and time again that you are a plotter, not a pantser or a
Right.
plantser, and yet you just use that term organically. So there are some aspects of your writing that are not 100% plotted out.
I don't think anything's 100%, but I will say that most of the idea for how that character's personality is, 90% of it is in place while I'm plotting before I've actually started writing.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes some little nuggets will come out, like when I'm writing a scene. I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is like an interesting aspect of this person that I can highlight, and it'll be fun to add to them. But I mean, most of it is pretty. I know what's going on in my head way ahead of time.
Even before you've really started getting down to the nuts and bolts of the narrative.
Yeah, because I've spent so long thinking about writing the story that, like, the characters, by the time I'm writing it, they're already alive. Like, they already have
Okay.
personalities. I already know. Like, I'm telling you, I'm not done writing The Mortal Coil, and probably the last book in that series, which is the Aphrodite book, which will be called Bride Price. I did finally name the damn thing. Like, I know all those characters. I know Aphrodite inside out. I know Hephaestus inside out. I know all the characters in that and how they're going to be, and, like, I already have them ready, even though I haven't written a word.
Right. So you've already developed those characters now to the point where
Pretty well. I mean, some of the side characters, not as much, but the main
sure.
ones where I'm really trying to problem solve, like, how am I going to have, contrive for these various series of events to happen? Like, some of that starts informing personality.
Right. So you're again, that's very much what I would consider or think of as a plotter's technique or way of approaching characters. Whereas, honestly, for myself, I have a general idea, but it isn't until I really start writing the story down that I start to hear the voice. Although, to be fair, I will say sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes I actually, long before I've ever written word one of a story, I will hear a character speak to me and I'll say, oh my God, I'm going to write that someday. I'm going to write that person. I'm going to write that character in the context of this story. So I don't know. It's just interesting to me because it seems that there is, in fact, when it comes to, characters and their voices, that there are some intrinsic differences between the way that a pantser/plancer approaches them as opposed to a plotter.
Probably. I mean, we're talking to our own two selves here. So, I mean, I would definitely like to hear from other authors if you want to, hit us up on Twitter at romanceNSFW. And let us know how your process works, because I can't vouch that every plotter builds characters the way I do. You know what I mean? I just know what I'm doing.
Right. No, and I totally agree. I mean, but in the context of our podcast, it's just you and I.
Sure.
Although, just as a little side note here, we will be interviewing other authors in 2021. In fact, I think our next episode is going to be an interview.
Yes.
And that can be a point of discussion, because I would be interested and am interested to hear how that works for other authors. I've seen, small threads and small discussions about it, but to me, it's fascinating because as a writer, of course, like any writer, I kind of live in my own little bubble when I'm writing, especially when it's by myself or not on a co-write. And to me, it's one of those things. It's one of the things that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, is this whole concept of our differences in writing styles, how we approach narrative, how we approach dialogue, how we approach structuring our stories. And those are fascinating to me. I mean, it's part of the reason why I was excited to be involved in this podcast, because these are things that I love talking about, and they're interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm fascinated as well, because I mean, our brains all work differently, which is why we're coming at the process in whatever way is working for us. That's what we're doing. I mean, it's like painting. You just paint how it works for you. Right. And I don't know about you, but like, maybe you have an opposite set of things where, in the last episode, we talked about how we always are concerned about growing and improving ourselves as authors. So I'm sure, like myself, you probably have things where you're like, yes, on the next book, I would like to improve this, this thing about my writing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I get concerned about, that I am trying to do better, and I don't know how well I'm doing. I'm not looking for compliments. That's not what I'm saying. But like that, because I seem to be I come up with plots first and world building first and characters second, like their personalities and stuff. I do wonder if my characters end up feeling like cardboard characters, like they're too archetypal, they're too much of a stereotype for one thing or another, and like I don't spend enough time like making them more well-rounded and nuanced and unusual. It's a insecurity of mine that's a problem, because again, especially with really big and involved stuff like Emperor, like I came up with a lot of archetypes ahead of time. I mean, that's not a romance. One would argue that there are too many characters in that book and too much going on, but it was early in my writing career, and I will finish it, and it's still going to be how I outlined it. But I do worry that like I've just got too much going on with people.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because in the last episode I mentioned that same thing, but and because it has been brought up to me, but in the exact opposite, is that I spend too much time in my characters' heads, and I put that on the page because I am a huge lover of internal dialogue. And I've actually had readers say there was too much internal dialogue. But
Aw.
that's what I hear. When I'm thinking of a story, a lot of times I hear internal dialogue. I've used the term Walter Mitty because that's kind of who I am. I'm a very Walter Mitty-esque type writer. And so unlike you, what you just described, I will say if there's things that I feel like I need to work on as a writer, it's that world building, that creating within the narrative structure enough detail that my readers don't just know what my characters are thinking or how they're saying what they're saying or conveying their thoughts to the reader, but what in the hell is the world that they're actually populating? And I don't. And as a writer, I think that's one of the things where I'm weak is that I
don't think you are weak there though, because so far the books that you've published, unless I'm forgetting one, have been contemporary, right?
Yes.
I'm forgetting something major.
No, they're all contemporary.
And for example, Jaded. I won't no spoilers, but there were people whose jobs you would show the character while they were doing their day job or things adjacent to that, and I was like, holy mackerel, did he either do this job or how much research did he do? Because it felt very real. Like because in contemporary, that's your world building, is getting to know the environment that you intend your characters to be in the real world, right?
Right.
Because you don't have to make up shit like fantasy.
Right, yeah,
I don't have to make up a religion and a social structure. It exists. But you do have to then know about, what is it like a job working in the, printing area of a newspaper, for example. And that stuff felt very real to me. I was like, this is very exact. Like, I don't, this terminology that the characters are using, I buy that they work there because I wouldn't have known that stuff. It could have been total bullshit. I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, but it sounded correct.
It sounded correct and very real to me. And so I've never read your stuff and been like, oh, I don't think Shane makes his environments feel real. I don't think that at all.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, we've talked about this before, though. Self-criticism is the bane of any writer's or most writers' existence. We're far more critical of ourselves than we are of others. So,
and yet it is the whip by which we motivate ourselves.
That's right. That's right.
To improve.
It's just, I feel like, so I would maybe say that maybe I need to dial back my internal dialogue and my character dialogue and focus more on the environment. Whether that's right or wrong, I can't say, but it is something that I think about. And maybe I'm overreacting to, something that I've keyed in on from readers' comments that maybe I shouldn't, but it is what it is.
It makes sense though. And I mean, I had a couple, like, I don't know if it was my first or second, I had some early people that were editing stuff. And this was before even I was published, for people to buy. It was just stuff that was on Literotica, like The Devil's Luck and things like that.
Right.
And I had the criticism, like, okay, this is a lot of internal monologue. Like, character A, like, the hero says something to her here, and then there's like 2 or 3 paragraphs of stuff before she responds. And like, in reality, she's going to respond pretty quick. You can't have all that in there. It's not realistic. And like, hearing that a couple of times repeated from an editor, I think early on, I'm very, I don't know what word I'm very punishment motivated, I guess. I was just like, okay, we don't do that. So early on, that was something I was like really wanting to weed out. And sometimes I'm like, I could probably get away with more of it. Like when I was putting out Nepenthe, that Octavia My Tentacle Porn. Right. When I put that out, I knew I was going to put it out under a pseudonym, and no one else was going to know. No one was going to know that it was Eris. So it freed me up. I was like, this is just fun tentacle porn, and I'm just going to write this, and I'm not going to like critique myself so much on a lot of stuff that I really, when I'm writing something like Medusa, like I'm really just nitpicking myself to death over. I'm like, I'm just going to go for it and write whatever. And there's long chunks of internal narrative, internal monologue. Like the second chapter in there, the guy that's like the second in command, basically the alien. Yeah. Like there's like a lot of stuff that he's observing about the people around him. There's like goes a long time with no dialogue where he's, telling you what's happening with the humans on the ship and all this stuff. And that's way more than I would have allowed myself to do as Eris, because I'm like, okay, I expect a certain level of I don't know what out of myself, and here I'm like, well, fuck it, nobody cares. I can write all this narrative, and who's gonna stop me? Like,
Yeah, you gave yourself free reign.
no one. And what's funny is that no one came at me and was like, oh, there's too much internal monologue. So it's kind of like, well, now I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Now I don't know which way to go.
Yeah. And honestly,
But it is kind of, that's one of those books you read because you're after a very specific type of smut. And I don't know that those people like, give a shit that much. Like, they're not like, literary critics.
yeah, but
They're looking to feel funny in their pants is what
right. Okay, sure.
But nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with
I wrote it to make people feel that way.
Exactly. I will still say, though, that even within that kind of style of book, you did a fantastic job of creating plausible, believable, relatable characters. And
Thank you.
they did not feel forced or trite or like we were talking about earlier, propped up. They only, in none of those little vignettes did they seem like in any one of them, the characters were just there only to serve a purpose. And
Sure.
by that, you know what I mean,
Right.
as a hole to be filled or as an appendage to fill a hole.
Yeah.
They had personality and
They had motivation.
They had
I do feel like I could have done better for some of the characters, but there's going to be a second book, so I'll do better then. I'll establish some more motivations.
Okay. So what about your other books, though? Let's talk to me about like Emperor or The Last Dominant or Smoke to Fire. Are there any of those books where you felt the character was either so spot on, that you were just like, oh, this is the perfect character. God, I love this. Or Jesus, that was just a hot mess. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm done with it. I got to move on. And
Sure. I'm kind of mentally reviewing the list. I feel like probably so. I'm proud of the Eighth House. I feel like probably the Devil's Luck, which is the second. This is the next thing I wrote after the Eighth House. Like, it was the second thing I ever wrote. I could have probably done a little better, but again, it was early. What are you gonna do?
Right.
I'm trying to think, and there were people that didn't like that, but I think a lot of people didn't like it because of, aside from the fact that it's non-con in the beginning, a lot of people didn't like it. Minaj was not popular at that time, and a lot of people were like, oh, I don't want her to like be with both of them. She needs to pick. They need to fight. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here.
Right.
But that's not really what we're getting at here. I know two characters I really liked a lot were Emmett Bird in Gallows Pole and the Hangman Vane. I like those characters a lot. Like, I still feel good about them. Like, their motivations, their personalities, the insides of their head. I feel good about those two. I'm trying to think of characters where people have like not responded well and they just weren't feeling it. I don't want to stare off into space and have dead air here. Like,
but what about, like, I'm trying to think of reviews I've read of your books, and I'm going to pick out one because it first of all, it's fairly recent in my mind because people have been talking about it. And that is Bass Ackwards. People loved, they hated.
They hated Bill in the first chapter for sure.
Right.
They're like, this motherfucker. Like,
and they loved Christina.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. You didn't pick either one of those characters. So now I'm going to put you on the spot. How did you feel about those characters? You must have felt something because God damn, you wrote them so well. And
I felt good about them. And I think maybe that's an example of I felt able to spend more time on them, like making them more well-rounded because I was not having to world build some fantasy or sci-fi world. It's always like 6 of one, half dozen of the other, because it's like you don't have to do the world building, so that's a weight off. I mean, you do have to research some stuff, so you don't sound like you're just completely making shit up. Like, working at a equipment rental place.
Right. Right.
But then in the fantasy world, it's like, okay, you get to do whatever you want, but you have to do it. Like there's nothing there, so you have to spend all the time doing that. I'm happy with those characters. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of myself for being able to take a situation like how that book starts, which is awful, and turn it around and make people actually like Bill. I was laughing too because I saw some comments on a subreddit about it. And then people were talking about that subject, and some person was like, and let's not forget his name is Bill. The subtext of that being that they did not think that was a sexy name.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I named him that because of that. Like, there's some of it was kind of my little fuck you to like outrageous romance novel male lead names.
Chance and
yeah, and I don't want to start naming them out because inevitably I'll randomly hit one that one of my friends wrote, and then I'm gonna get hit up like, hey screw you, lady. Right. But there's just outrageous names like, this is my boyfriend Bricklayer Smith, and I'm like, what the fuck kind of name is that? You know what I mean?
No, it's
I don't know.
true.
I think there's an old lady in me that's just like, just name him John. Why does it got to be some weird name? Why is everybody's name got to be Devlin or something? Anyway, I've probably irritated like 10,000 people right now. So, but I was just like, I'm thinking, honestly, even Bill is probably an older name than how old Bill is supposed to be. Like, Bill's like 42 or something. Like, he could probably have another 10, 20 years on him to be called Bill on average. But I was just like, what's some name that just sounds like some guy that runs a U-Haul, and it's just like some grumpy boss. And I was like, I was going for some name like that, like Bill or Doug or I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but okay, but still, you managed to turn that name.
I just, in the beginning, I wanted him to be so not hot. Like, I wanted everybody to hate it. Like, I legit was because I never intended to publish that, really. I just was going to put it on Literotica. And I was just like, how can I push every button? How can I make this guy so fucking despicable? And people like Bill are listening like, hey, screw you, lady.
Yeah, right, exactly. Hey, whoa. What's going on here? No, but then you turned him around. And there are times when Christina calls out his name and it is sexy. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I turned the ship around. I was very excited about that.
And it's because the characters' motivations are become clearer to us as readers, and we start to feel empathy. And even though the sexy times, again, no spoilers, can be a little bit dubcon at best.
Especially at first.
Yeah, we start to hear both of their voices. And then the name goes from being something that, like you said, was, oh, yeah, sure, of course he's a Bill, to every William and Bill out there, to being like Christina, oh, Bill. And, exactly. And that, to me...
and see, I keep trying to answer this question, and I keep realizing my answers are plot-based, and I'm like, this is clearly how I write, because that's what I focus on. Because I'm like, I wanted a story that both had them, like, fucking on the first page and also be a slow burn at the same time. I'm like, how do you accomplish this?
Right.
Which, I won't tell people, but...
Right. And
you haven't read it, but I tried to accomplish it. Right. And I wanted it to not just be with their relationship, but finding out about them as people. Like, I didn't want to tip my hand right in the beginning and tell you everything about them. Like, I wanted to start to... Because you don't know why Christina,
is doing what
goes along with the stuff in the first scene. Like, you're just like, what's wrong with this girl? Like, why, and like, you don't even get to know until like the third chapter, but you're still, so it's like, I want you to slowly get to know them.
Yeah.
And because mystery is fun.
Right. And you did. And then our viewpoint of both of their characters changed. And I've seen people say this. I almost DNF'd this book.
Yeah.
I almost DNF'd this book because that first scene, that first chapter is really a bit of a mind fuck. It's like, okay, what the hell did I get myself into?
What did I just read? Why is this happening?
And then it becomes even more of a mind fuck in the sense that you're like, when you get to chapter 8, 9, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. If I think back to chapter 1, I was like, this guy no way. Where's HR?
I know, right? I really like to make people love a villain against
Right.
their will. I think I also am in a non-con relationship with the reader. That's messed up.
Well,
Sorry, everyone.
you're right. You certainly did it with Bass Ackwards. Some of your other books.
Clicking the next page is consent. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
That's messed up. Okay.
I mean, but The Last Dominant had a little bit of a taste of that too, but not nearly to the same level.
Not as much, because you could see that the character did not want to be in a situation
right.
where he was a villain. Like, he was kind of forced into it by outside circumstances.
Right. He was forced into it. Right. Again, no
by
spoilers.
An entire socio-political thing.
Right. By the political drama that's going on.
But the same as the Eighth House,
Yeah.
Hades was kind of like extorted into doing what he did.
Yeah.
But at the same time, early on, he's also kind of like, well, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. So he was not like super innocent either.
No, but again, the way you brought the characters to life was such that you understood their motivations, and you made it clear that, hey, this is part of this character's personality. And so in the case of, Hades, it's like, this is just part of who he is. So yeah, it wasn't like you said, or you tried to convey to the reader, not that I'm approving of this, but it's just part of who he is. So of course he's going to take advantage of this situation. And then you redeemed him. And that's exactly what you did with Bill in Bass Ackwards. You redeemed him. And the way you went about it was delicious.
Well, I'm glad you like it. I want to do better on things. I don't want my characters to just be archetypes. All I can say is I'll just keep putting things out and hoping people like it. But that's the thing I want to focus on. I don't want them to just be like, oh, this is the, sidekick trope or whatever. Like, this is the angry boss trope. I don't know.
Right. And I think if you're worried about that, you're going to really find your niche, so to speak, when you get to Mortal Coil. I think people are really going to be in for something.
We'll see. I don't know. It's what I don't know if you have this, but when I'm writing something, I vacillate back and forth between this is the greatest thing and I can't wait to show it to everybody to, oh my God, this is just a flaming piece of crap and like people are gonna hate it.
Right. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, we all do that. Come on. I mean, we've even talked about that in previous episodes. That's just part of who we are as writers, that we do that to ourselves. And that's why we have writer friends and readers who cheer us along and tell us, no, don't think that. And I'm doing that right now, in a sense, with you where it comes to Mortal Coil, because I know I'm excited. And I know in my heart of hearts that readers are going to be excited and they're going to love it. And I have
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. No, of course not. No pressure whatsoever. And bear in mind, I'm saying all of this only having read very small parts of it. In fact, with few exceptions, I haven't read anything beyond what you've already shared with people in your group.
Like on social media and
right,
stuff.
and on social media. With a few exceptions. You have been kind, and you've fed me little other tidbits along the way too. But listen, there's enough there, and it is different. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. It is different. It is unlike any other story that I can think of in recent memory, simply because it kind of switches the roles.
There's not a lot of woman on top dynamic.
I know.
And I may pay for it, honestly, because a lot of my readers like that, like, alpha dude, that alpha hole character. And this is not that, really, so we'll see.
Yeah.
But I also know that I am living in a time that a lot of women are really resonating with the, Medusa as a hero, Medusa as saying fuck you to, like, patriarchy and all that kind of stuff.
That's
so
right.
That could win, who knows. But let us talk about some of your characters, Mr. Shane. I would like to know, can you think of a character or characters that are like the ones you feel like, yes, that these are the ones I have really done the best on, these are the most fleshed out, nuanced characters.
So it's weird because as we were talking and I had asked you that question, I started thinking about, okay, so what about you? Knowing full well that this is going to ricochet and come back on me. And the weird thing is, the first two characters that I thought of were villains.
Oh, well.
And I don't know what that says about me.
It's fun as shit writing villains. Come on, it is.
But
because you don't have to redeem a villain. You have a license to write someone who's just awful, and it's very cathartic.
But hear me out, because in both cases, they are villains that at some level, at some point in the book I was writing, I tried to make them somewhat not redeemed, but
they're human in there somewhere.
Yes.
You can sort of almost kind of understand how they ended up in their fucked up place that they're at.
Both of them. And I'm speaking specifically about Daniel and Jasmine. And then, oh God. And now I blanked. I'm totally blanking on his name. In
Jason?
Huh?
Jason?
Jason. Jason.
Because I remember him rhyming with Mason.
Yeah, Jason in Jaded. They both are really fucked up individuals. Okay, Daniel he is a monster.
I almost feel like Daniel has more of an excuse, but we don't know a lot about Jason's childhood, so
true. And I didn't. Because
Daniel had a pretty traumatic childhood with a lot of cultural conditioning.
Right, and he had a father figure that basically made him who he was. And in that case, I specifically made that clear because I didn't want Daniel just to be this big hulking rapist. And again,
right. I mean, there's no excuse for the behavior.
No, there's no excuse, but I wanted there to be in the reader's mind some understanding of why he's behaving the way he's behaving. And I specifically...
Right, because nobody's born no baby just pops out and that's what they are. You have to be conditioned into all kinds of stuff.
Right. And God, I am so waiting when I can have time to sit down with Yolanda Serrano, because she understands much of her writing revolves around, completely heinous.
I know she does a lot of horror
stuff. Pure evil. But even she, what I've read of her, recognizes that there are always, even if you read about, the two characters in Cold Blood, and there's always motivation for why they are the way they are. And that's what I wanted to bring to Daniel. I wanted people to understand why he was the way he was. And now we're going to circle back to the whole voices thing. I heard his voice that way. He spoke to me, as
now you know what he sounds like.
Right.
Right.
Not to get all metaphysical or anything, but
you can do that.
He made me understand that this is the reason why he was the way he was, and he demanded that I make sure that the reader knew that, even while he was doing these horrible, terrible things to Sloane. And there's a scene in Jasmine that Jennifer and I, at the time, kind of went back and forth a bit about, because she was like, I don't know. And I'm like, no, I'll change it if I need to. I'll make it shorter. I'll do whatever you think. But this scene has to be in there. And she helped me get through it. And in the end, she said, yeah, it's a good scene. We need to leave it in. But it was important to me. It was, and I say this, again, not to sound super metaphysical or anything, but it was one of those points where he said, no, you have to let them see me do this. You have to let the reader know that this part of me exists. And it was,
I'm really fascinated how they're talking to you. You're saying he's telling you have to see this. I'm completely fascinated. It does not work that way for me at all.
Yeah. Oh, and again.
And I definitely feel like I'm hearing something. Like, I don't want to say that I hear nothing, but it's just not that way. It's a different way.
Yeah. And for me, it that is the way it is. Not all the time. Now, again, I don't want to make it sound like there's constantly, but there are, and it's especially during very strong scenes where I literally hear them talking, so to speak. Jason was another character in Jaded that I heard his voice at certain times. And, if there's anything I do kind of regret is that I didn't give a little bit more of his backstory. I just kind of inserted him in where he'd already gone through something very traumatic in his life that had impacted him. And he was very frustrated, angry young man, lashing out at the world for what he perceived as injustice that he should not have had to endure. And of course, somebody discovered that online about him and then exploited it.
Well, and I will say that when I read, like, I don't feel ripped off about Jason. Like, I don't feel like, oh, I needed to know his childhood. You know what I mean? Like, I felt good about how much of him there was. So I wouldn't put that as any kind of criticism.
Yeah. I just think in hindsight, I could have elaborated a little bit more on it. But be that as it may,
it was enough. It was plenty for me to, like, believe him by far.
Right.
To believe his motives and everything.
You.
And, on top of that, he's a villain. He's not a anti-hero that you're going to redeem for the heroine. You already had your hero, which was Mason. And those are the people that we're trying to focus on. Which you also did a great job on those two as well.
Well, thank you. But yeah, it's funny because those are the two that I immediately thought of. And, again, I'm not trying to say that, I love those characters. I loved everything.
Well, but you're allowed to be proud. You did a good job.
Right. I hated what those characters were doing, but I loved being able to justify it in a sense. I know that sounds terrible, but not justify.
It does not sound terrible because, and I'm going to say this briefly and not make a tangent because we're not talking about me right now, but you saying this made me think of the one I forgot, which was I made a prequel for my villain in my pirate book, Roland Graves, who was just this psychopath, basically. I mean, I'm sure there's a more technical word for what he's a serial killer, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the prequel to that, I don't think you read that one, which is fine, but it shows you how he goes from being like a normal guy who's like a medical doctor to a serial killer. Like, it takes you through the process of, like, how the world breaks him down.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten about that until you were bringing that up.
But yeah, so see, it's not always the good characters. It's sometimes the ones that resonate as a writer.
Sure. That's what I mean. Like, the ones that you're like, oh, I did a good job on making this a nuanced person.
Right.
Do you have characters that you feel like after you put them out of there, that readers were like, I didn't, like, it was someone they were supposed to like, and they were like, I didn't really like that person, and they felt cardboard to me or anything?
That's Mason. That is Mason in Jasmine.
In Jasmine, though.
In Jasmine.
Not in his actual story where he's the hero.
No, not in Jaded, but in Jasmine, that's Mason. I mean,
even reading it, I thought he was a dick, but I also liked him. I gotta be honest. I was like, he's a dick, but I love him.
I know, right? This is one of those instances.
It's well known I do like the pricks, so that's going to be taken out of context.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh my God, your DMs for the next.
The soundbite, that's great. It's going to be somebody's ringtone. Okay.
Are going to be full. No, it was. And I've commented on it in posts, in my newsletter, and in private conversations with you and with Livia and with Jennifer, that why did they hate him so much in Jasmine? Because in all honesty, in Jasmine, I identified with Mason as a person, as someone that I felt was close to me as who I am as a human than any other character.
In that he was a cynic.
He was a cynic.
That's probably why people, like, if again, I liked him as a character. I mean, I like villains. I like characters that do things that are not right. They're interesting, so I like them. But I can see people who want to like him as a human being, like if they met him in the real world. I mean, him being opposed to, I'm so sorry I can't remember the younger cop's name. But basically, him being opposed to Dudley Do-Right, who's got hope and is trying to do the right thing the whole
Right.
time, and people want to root for that guy. So then they're seeing Mason be, all crotchety and thwarting him. I could see people going, "Oh, I didn't like that," but it's
Yeah.
like
Oh, and they
I'm not
did.
talking about whether you like the character as a human being. Like for me, I'm thinking about, do I find this character interesting?
Yeah, exactly. And this is going to be a question I'm going to ask you here in a few minutes. But yeah, in Jasmine Mason, I identified with, and he was very much a part of me. Um, and oddly enough, Sloane was to in certain respects too, but because Sloane's naivete and her Sin has always complained this about me. Her um, worldview of, oh, everything will be all right, it's all going to
Mm,
work out, um, is something that Sin has said. That's it can be irritating at times. But Mason was the opposite part of me that's just cynical and jaded,
hmm.
and
Hence the,
yeah, hence the
Brooke
title
hated.
of his book, right? The follow up story. Um,
I have a question too when you're.
okay, and I channeled that, and I loved it, and I loved that character. And then when the book came out, everyone was just bagging on him so hard.
Aw.
And I hate him.
Well, you showed them when they read Jaded because then they ended up liking him. So they're
Well, yeah,
tough beans.
right. I hope I did, anyways. That was my intent to a certain degree. Plus, I wanted to show that he was capable of recovering from the trauma that he had gone through with his uh,
Yes, his
first
past without being
his past,
spoilery.
right, without being spoilery. Um, but it was one of those instances where uh, it was a character that I really loved, and I put a lot of myself into him. People hated him, but I still am very proud of him. I love.
Sometimes it's kind of fun when people hate somebody, though. Honestly, because you're just like, yeah, I made you feel that.
Right. This is
We're
true.
evil.
This
Writers
is
are evil. Don't think anything else.
right. This is true. And but again, the first two characters that I picked were the ones where I really felt their backstory, the story that they told me, that they insisted that I include in the books, was important, and I had to do justice by it and do it right. Otherwise, they wouldn't shut up.
That
And
makes complete sense.
yeah,
Listen, I'm respecting your process. I'm fascinated by how it works, and it's proving to work well for you because, again, as I've said, when I read your books, I buy your characters as whole, nuanced people. I don't feel like they're tropes. I don't feel like they're cardboard. They feel very real to me.
well,
I
thank
did
you.
have a question though.
Sure.
Have you written any characters that were maybe not the main character? They were like a side character or something that you wish there was more space for them somewhere, like maybe or maybe like it doesn't necessitate that you're like I gotta write my own their own book necessarily, but some of them you're like, oh, that character's so cool, I wish I could just like write a million pages of them. They're so much fun, or they're so evil or whatever. Do you have characters like that you're like, god, they're fun to write?
Absolutely. I mean, I spoke about this in our last episode um, when we were talking about writing styles, and my
Mm-hmm.
writing style is getting things out onto paper sometimes that I know good goddamn well are going to get cut. And Graham in Ferris was
Mm-hmm.
one of those characters. It's why I wrote an entire section about him that I knew was going to have to be cut, and I fought against it. I mean, it literally took Stella telling me, when you really got to, and I'm like, yeah, I know. But this story, because he's a character who's older and he's been through the ringer.
Seen things.
He's seen things. He knows how the system in DC with procurement and dealing with government agencies, he knows how it works, and he can dance the dance. And there's so much about him that I was just fascinated by as the character began to develop. And mind you, when I first started writing that story, he was just supposed to be the boss. He was just like the boss, and that's it. There's nothing about him that I really want to know or need to know, and I'm not gonna. And all of a sudden, I was elaborating on him, and
you were like enthralled with this guy.
Right. I'm filling it and I'm writing, and I'm like, what the hell happened here? This dude just needs to fill a slot.
Right.
And now all of a sudden he's got a story and he's got character and he's got a personality and he's a father figure to Ferris at the same time that he's his boss, and he's chastising him and, get back in line, son, and it was just he was one of those characters that really, I thought, wow, this really went way beyond what anything I could have ever anticipated when I first sat down to start writing the book. Another one I was just thinking about here a second ago, and now it slipped my mind. But it was the same sort of thing. It was a character that I never really expected anything to happen with. It's not Carmen, because I knew I wanted
it's
Carmen.
It's her wife, right?
Yeah.
I was literally going to bring that character up. I like, she steals her scenes when she's in them.
Yeah.
Isn't her name start with an M, like Miriam or something?
Yeah. It's Miriam or Miranda. God, this is so typical
like everyone,
of writers.
You should just know that I'm a horrible friend, that I can't remember the names of Shane's characters. Like,
no, it's not just being a friend. I've heard you do it. I've heard other writers. I've heard Misha Stone in her Sexy Sunday not be able to name her own characters from the
It's
books.
happened to me. It's happened to me. I'm like, what the fuck was that guy's name? Especially if it's something I haven't written in a long time.
Yeah. It's who we are, I guess, at some point, that we can't even remember. We know who they are, but we can't remember their name. It's that party thing where you're like, oh my God, I know you.
You got the whole vibe of the person, but
right.
Not the name. Anyway.
But not the name. But yeah, she was a character. She's a lawyer. And in her scenes, she had such a personality.
She's got this whole like Texas kind of like sweetheart personality.
Right. And that hides a very acerbic, because she's a lawyer, she keys in on things immediately, and she calls Mason out. And there's one scene in Jaded where she calls Mason out for trying to prevaricate about how he feels.
I don't remember what she said, but in the context, it was like, really, bro? Really?
Yeah, exactly. And she's like, you're not getting off the hook. You're not fooling me. You're not fooling any of us. And why don't you just man up and admit what you're feeling here, and so that we can move on, because otherwise we're just going to spin our wheels here until finally you're forced to. And yeah, I love that. I love that character. And I loved that part of her because it wasn't planned. It was completely organic.
That's fun.
It wasn't, again, she's just supposed to be Carmen's wife. Carmen's the main character, the main focus. She's Mason's friend and confidant. And, she's the one who went through shit with him in Jasmine. And then here we have her wife who shows up in Jaded, and she takes on this whole personality and steals the scene.
But that's how you are, because that's how your process works. No one is just Carmen's wife and she's just a stunt wife. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean that. I mean that in a good way. Like, no one is just there to like take up space and, be stuttering man number 2 in the credits. You know what I mean?
But the problem with that is that then it turns the books into...
then because if they're talking to you, you have to like
exactly.
be the one to shut them up. So that is, I have different problems.
Yeah, it is. It's a problem because, like Stella pointed out to me, and like I've experienced, even Jennifer, like having to, there's a scene that I keep talking about in Jasmine that we had to take out, which was about 2 minor characters, where I fleshed those characters out. This actress and her lawyer, I fleshed them out, and they were beautiful. And it all had to come out because even though they talked to me long enough and hard enough that I had to write that chapter down, it didn't belong in the book. It it just didn't. It didn't belong there.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I'm like, I don't remember that. Well,
Yeah,
now I know why I don't remember that.
It's not there. It got cut, and rightfully so. But again, that goes back to our previous episode. That's my writing style. I've just come to realize it. The book that I'm writing right now, I haven't gotten there yet, but I swear to you, Eris, there will be a scene, whether it's just a scene or a chapter that I'm going to write. I'm going to write the whole goddamn thing out. I'm going to flesh the characters out. I'm going to put it in there, and I know I'm going to cut it. I know.
But at least you know ahead of time, and you're like getting more used to, hey, this is my style,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping it's less of a trauma as time goes on to go, you know what, I just got to cut this.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too.
Because I know the first time it happens, you're just like, ugh.
Yep, because I
wrote this and it's good.
I have not gotten there yet. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
And it does regard characters, your characters. Specifically, you create very unique and your characters oftentimes have little quirks about them. And I want to know, those quirks, are you first of all, are you cognizant that you create them? Is that a intentional thing? And if so, is it something that you draw on from like real life? Is it something you noticed about someone and you said, I love that little quirk, I'm going to include it in the book?
Noticing it about people in real life, I'd have to think about it. I don't know that I'm always conscious of it if that is happening, and I'm sure it is happening. Sometimes it'll be like as I'm going, something pops into my head, and I write it, and then I'm like, not a major plot thing, but just like a minor piece of narrative in the scene, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. I'm gonna run with that. This person's got this issue.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Or they've got this thing happening. Some stuff I kind of know ahead of time, and I've decided, because I don't want the character to just be like a trope. Like I want them to feel more real, and that they, we all have oddities about them. And I found it was interesting. Some people that like this story in The Last Dominant resonated with the fact that Killian has got a lot of OCD issues.
Right.
Like that he doesn't Rushka's making noises, and she realizes it starts bothering, so then she does it on purpose.
Yes.
That's how she is. But it's like he doesn't like a lot of noises, a lot of sound going on. He doesn't like things to be dirty. Like he's like overly everything in his where he
doesn't
lives,
like
clean, super clean person.
Right. He doesn't like it when she messes up the sheets on the bed and then walks away. Things like that.
Right. And there's even there's times when he has to do something that he normally wouldn't do. That it's like I've now got to justify in his internal monologue that he's like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this, but it's got like I don't want to touch this wet thing,
right.
You know what I mean, or whatever. Which I will say that is me. I have unsolicited wetness problems. I don't like touching things that are wet when I don't expect them to be wet.
Okay, so you are in fact then.
So some of the stuff comes from me, but not always. It depends. Like his thing about little noises, like little tapping and stuff. Yeah, that'll drive me fucking bananas. So some of the things are me. Like another character that has pieces that I know are someone else. I didn't intend to make them that way, but then that was how they started, like their dialogue started sounding. So I'm like, okay, I can use that as inspiration. For example, Christina's granddad in Bass Ackwards, a lot of the figures of speech and the way he talks sounds like how my grandfather would sound.
Okay.
And I think that was helpful because it's like, I have something to draw upon. Like I wasn't trying to make him into my grandfather. Like the personalities are not the same. Like, my grandfather didn't have a hoarding problem, but like just figures of speech he would use.
Right.
Things like that.
Right. Well, they're details.
Sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it just starts happening. And then I'm like, well, this is good. I will keep this and keep working with it.
Okay.
Like in the one I'm working on right now, I mean, some of it's just to differentiate characters from each other so they don't start sounding the same. Like the non-main character, the Minotaur, which, that becomes more complicated in the book, but we'll just go with the Minotaur character. He's got a much more jovial, kind of adventurous, risk-happy personality than Perseus, who's the main character.
Right.
And so it's like when I'm writing his dialogue and his internal, thoughts and stuff, he swears more often. Like it's not Perseus once in a while will drop an F-bomb, rarely. I mean, I definitely try not to do modern swears, but fuck has been around a really long time.
Right.
But it's like the Minotaur's language is more casual. There's like some more contractions here and there, like some more swears, stuff like that, that Perseus would not say and would not talk that way because that's not his personality.
Okay. So, but those are character details of character traits that then help establish the character for who he is. You're doing that intentionally.
I like to hope so.
Okay.
I like to think of some of this, again, some of it gets thought of ahead of time, and then some of it is accidental at some point in the book, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I should run with this. This is good.
Okay, I guess that's where I was going.
Like, I knew in Bass Ackwards that Bill was going to be like one of his big deals is he's like obsessed with people being on time. Like, you cannot be late to work.
Right.
And that comes up multiple times in the book.
Right. And he also talks about, he writes, what is it that he writes on his wallet or something about?
Right, like he has attempted to kicked a smoking habit. So on his wallet, he says, if you buy cigarettes again, I'll fucking kill you, in like all caps and a Sharpie.
Right, exactly. But you just said it. Some of those are in fact details that and I say this because you are a plotter. You plotted those details out as part of the development of that character, and others are organic. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting.
Well, and so I think some of the organic ones come out of, I know what their persona is. So when they're in a situation where it's like, when I have an outline for a scene, I kind of have written down, these are the beats. She comes into the room, he says something like this to her, this is how she reacts to it. I mean, it's very sloppy and vague. And so when I'm actually writing it and getting down to like, how exactly am I going to tell the people how this happens, that's where some of the little stuff comes up. But it's like, okay, how would Bill react to this? And then maybe he reacts in like, I didn't plan ahead of time his specific reaction, but it will be within what I consider his personality to be. So if I consider him to be this grumpy boss, then it was well within his personality to go, oh yeah, then he's got a problem with people being late, and that can be repeated throughout the story.
Right, and then you can take that detail and then carry it through the rest of the story as part of helping to establish the kind of person he is.
Right.
So there's a little bit of organic matter there that you're using to build upon what you've plotted.
How about yourself?
Well, for me, in general, because I don't plot, for me, a lot of it is much more organic in the process of writing. I will say the end result is the same in many instances, because I will take, once I've organically dug up that detail, I'll then go, ooh, I like this. Mason having a specific beer that he enjoys, that's an IPA, so it's very bitter and harsh on the palate. And he artifacts is the specific one that in both books he talks about. He looks for, he seeks it out, or he seeks out a beer like that, and he chides. The sheriff,
the younger cop,
in Jasmine, about trying a specific local Texas beer that it's not an IPA, and so it's a lesser beer. That was a detail that I carried through, that came up organically, that I carried through both books, because that sharp bitterness was something I thought, yeah, that's Mason. He wants something sharp and bitter that makes him feel.
Do you ever have things like this? Like, you decide, like, you're writing and you're like, oh, this thing happened, and you're like, yeah, I feel like this is within the personality of this character, I will carry this forward. Have you ever like gone back to the beginning of your draft also, and then looked prior to that and go, I can insert something about this earlier as well a couple times, so it's not just like randomly out of the blue happens in the middle of the book and then you're like, why weren't they doing that this whole time?
Yes, absolutely. Because that absolutely happened in Jasmine. There was no real discussion about what Mason was drinking at the bar other than a beer. And Trish shows up, and because then when I first wrote it, there was nothing about that. It wasn't even a detail.
It was not relevant.
It came up later on. In fact, God, I think it wasn't until almost like the end of the book. Because it came up later, because Mason is like, yeah, what do you got that's an IPA? And uh, it's going to drive me nuts that I cannot remember uh, his name. But the sheriff, the deputy, is like, oh, well, if you're in Texas, you got to try Shinerbach. And he's like, all right, I trust you. And then he chides him later on. It's like, yeah, okay, well, this is, you know.
What I remember about Mason is from Jaded is that he has a specific breakfast cereal that he prefers. That comes up more than once.
That's true. There's another detail. But in going back to Jasmine and what we were just talking about, yeah, I went back then into the earlier chapter when Trish meets him at the bar that he frequents while he's on the clock. And I added that back in and added in that detail and even discussed it a little bit, because by the time I had gotten to that later point, I was like, this is important. There's a reason why he likes that, because even if he doesn't realize it, and I realize
self-flagellating.
It is. No, thank you. That's exactly what it is. It's a form of self-flagellation. He picks a beer that hurts to drink.
It hurts to drink. Yeah. That sounds like some Mason bullshit right there.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. And I didn't have that at the beginning when I was first writing those chapters, but it came up later, and I went back and I added it in. I was like, yeah, this is to me, it
makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And it became an important detail. And so again, not to, go all metaphysical, but yeah, he demanded that point be made.
Hey, well, then there you go. You got it. If the muse is telling you to put it in, you got to put it in, however that's being spoken to you.
Right.
Now, I noticed a couple times I do things also to I feel like they make people relatable, especially when the quirk is I don't want to say a flaw because that's a little dramatic, but when the quirk is something that people do that's not awesome, like it's just a dumb thing that people... I have a story it used to be in an anthology, and now it's on Literotica because after it was unpublished from the anthology, I hadn't bothered to put it out anywhere. It's not really super my brand, and it's not very long. But if you're looking for free reading and you want BDSM on
is this Ian's?
On Literotica, Vinyl Mine is the name of that story.
Oh, that's
but one
so
of the things
good.
about the main character in that one, Taylor, is that she has a thing where whenever her phone vibrates in her pocket, she just spaces on the fact that she even has a phone on her. So whenever it vibrates on her, it scares the shit out of her. She's always just god damn it, every time. And there comes a point later in the story where her phone rings and she doesn't freak out, and she's like, for once I didn't it became a point that she's like, for once you didn't get me, jerk. But I remember stupid stuff like that, but I feel she's more relatable because I think we all do dumb shit like that.
Yeah, well, no.
Or Ian always has water. He is Mr. Vitamins and Nutrition and always has a water on him, versus she always has a Gatorade or something. I forget what. It's always the same kind all the time.
Yeah, and again, those are little details, and at least for me, they come out organically sometimes. It sounds like that is also true for you, that sometimes they're organic rather than...
I think when it's not super important to the plot, I have more room for
those kind of
to happen organically, but I am kind of I am the dom of my plot, because if there's stuff that starts coming up that I'm like, this is going to fuck up my plot, then I'm like, well, then it's not happening. That's it. Which actually leads to kind of the next question we were going to talk about is, do our characters evolve over the course of the story, or do we wrangle them over, as we write and be no, you have to stay how I need you to be.
And you and I have had this discussion. And because I've talked about how sometimes my characters get away from me to the point where I write entire chapters about characters that, are going to, have no point in necessity to be in the book. But that's part of my process that I'm learning to deal with, that I do. You do wrangle your characters. You've point blank said it. You're like, get them people to toe the fucking line and
pretty much, because I'm we have a plot, people. We have things to do. We can't be going off on some tangent. I guarantee, and I'm telling you right now, it's not going to happen. So everybody just needs to chill out. I guarantee you, when the Mortal Coil comes out, regardless of how well people like Perseus and Medusa, people are going to ask for a book about the Minotaur. because he steals every scene that he's in. He's a fun character, and you're gonna like him, I promise. Like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. He's written to be likable. He is likable to write.
Yeah.
And it's like, I could write a lot more of him, and even the scenes that he's in, I'm like, I hope this is an author service and this is germane to the plot enough that, like, it's not gonna... Like, so far, the people who have been alpha reading it for me, nobody has said this is too much of a sidetrack, so I feel okay there.
Okay.
But he's someone like that he's very fun, and, like, the more I write him, the more, like, I want to write him, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I totally
And he's been
understand.
when I'm just like, okay, but this scene needs to, like, wrap up, because this is not the main couple, and this is not what we're doing right now.
And see,
not the focus.
Yes. So you're wrangling him into place. That character, even if he's speaking to you in such a way that you're like, oh, I know that people are going to love this. You're wrangling him in place. You're not writing an entire chapter or section that you're going to cut out. And
I try not to do that because I'm very averse to having to cut things I wrote, which I realize, yeah, so is every writer, dumbass, but, like, I try not to do that. Like, sometimes I'm just like, yeah, okay, but that's not important right now. We're not doing that. We're not having an extra sex scene in here. Like,
yeah,
settle down. We're not doing this whole, like, even as I've been getting towards the end of the book, other stuff has been coming up in the, series of climactic events and, like, the epilogue. I was like, oh yeah, and I should have this happen also, and then this should happen. I'm like, fuck, you gotta tie this up. You cannot, this cannot be going on and on.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Go on for 200,000 pages.
I'm like, but it's good, and it leads into the next book, and I'm like, well, just make it short.
Yeah.
Get crazy.
But I think that goes back to our conversations regarding the difference between plotter and pantser, and it does go into how we, each of us, approach our characters and their voice and what they're trying to tell us.
I will see people, like, other authors comment online. They'll make a post on Facebook like this. They'll be like, oh, this character, this male hero has decided, like, he needs to, like, have sex with her again before the end of the book. God damn it, why am I writing another sex scene? And I'm like, and I don't mean, like, I'm not disparaging anyone's process. You write how you write. But I just inside, obviously, that's how we are as humans. Compare it to my experience. And I'm like, what do you mean he's making you write it? Like, you are in charge. You are the master and god of this book, and he will do what the fuck you say. And if there's not room for another sex scene, then damn it, he's not having one.
Wow.
Get your pants, man. Like, we got places to be.
Listen, let your dom out. Let it flow, baby.
I do. I have to, or we're not. But
this is great.
We're not getting anywhere. Like, I'm like the worst. I'm like, if I had kids, I'd be like the dad on the road trip. Like, you won't stop for anything. Like, you barely lets you
Here's
pee.
a bottle, pee.
We are going to be in Denver in 12 hours, and we are not stopping to fuck around at a museum for an hour and a half. Like, get in the car, we're going. Like, that's me.
Yep. But
so bad.
That is your style. That is how you write. That is how you write your characters, how you wrangle them. I know exactly the kinds of conversations and threads that you're talking about because I see them too. I'm much more empathetic because, of course, I'm that person who's got these people talking to them and insisting that they write this scene or this chapter or whatever. And I'm listening and I'm doing it. I'm like, okay. So, whereas you...
But you're making good books, so it just goes to show that there's not a wrong way to do art because you're making books that people like to read. I like to read them. So
yes, and
obviously I'm the only person whose opinion matters.
Of course. I think that was implicit, but it's never a bad idea to just go ahead and point it out every once in a while in case there's someone out there.
In case there was some sort of
misunderstood. But no, it is one of those things that there's no right or wrong way to do it. There are different approaches to it. And I think for what we're talking about in our podcast, it's important for other writers who may be listening to this to understand. Because I think a lot of times new writers especially, I know we look for the things you should not do. And I say that with air quotes.
Yeah, this is the way. This is the one golden way that you must do everything.
And the reality is that when you start to listen to good writers and you start to feel confidence in yourself, you realize that that's not true. There is no one way. There's no one way to write your characters. There's no one way to listen to their voices, even if you may not even hear their voices. You may, in fact, only see them as characters to fulfill their purpose in your story. Now, of course, good writers are always going to have details that draw readers in. I mean, unless you're literally writing, journal, a journalistic viewpoint or something like that, you're going to need to do that, especially for the kind of writing that we do. But there's no right way or wrong way. There's the way that works for you. We're talking about two different ways that we handle how we approach characters. And neither one of us are right or wrong. It's just,
it's just what we feel comfortable with. Like, my comfort is because I'm a plotter and I like to know where I'm going ahead of time. I don't trust myself to do it, quote, right, whatever. I suppose right means up to my expectations. We'll put it that way. I don't trust myself to live up to my own expectations if I just let myself run wildly through the jungle and hope I don't trip and end up in a pit trap. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, I have to know where the hell I'm going, and that is why I'm a plotter, and that's why I kind of figure a lot of stuff out ahead of time, so that once I'm writing, I feel relaxed and good about that. I pretty much know where I'm going, and now I can relax and make pretty prose, which makes me happy.
Right. And I'm a plantser. I do a very minimalistic amount of plotting. My characters develop organically for me. I hear their voices as I start to write, and then they become more fleshed out characters. Very rarely do I ever have a fully fleshed out character profile, for lack of a better term, when I sit down and write. It happens as I'm writing. And yeah, I do. I go back and I add details. And I do rewriting a lot and editing and cutting entire scenes and chapters out. But that's just my process. That's how I write. One last thing I want to touch on before we tie up our episode: trope characters. We briefly touched on that earlier in the episode here, but we all have trope characters. We use them. I mean, let's be honest. In some respects, I think there are times we have to because our audience expects it. But do you think that if in a perfect world, do you try to avoid at all times trope characters, or do they have their place?
Well, I would argue that it is actually, and this includes like good fiction, it is difficult to find characters who are not tropes. And I don't mean that as a put down. I just mean that tropes are everywhere. People like them. Like, they exist because we like them. I know people go, oh, this character is so tropey, but I think that's like a very surface level statement, and it doesn't delve into the fact that even characters that are universally found interesting or loved in a book or various media, TV, movies, and stuff like that, many of them are still a type of trope, but it's done well, and so we like it. Now, done poorly, or it's like, they don't go any further beyond one cliche, then I think people tend to see that and have a problem with it. But I think when you think about it, like, most characters somewhere are some kind of trope or another. I don't think trope has to be a bad word.
Thank you.
Especially when we're reading things like romance or other genre fiction. I've probably said this before, but it's like your lizard brain wants you to be able to predict outcomes because you're safer that way. And so you get a dopamine reward when you're able to predict outcomes. And so when you have a character that looks like they're supposed to behave a certain way and they continue to behave that way, your brain is like, yes, this is good. Here are the good feelings,
Right.
I don't know what dopamine is. It's not a hormone, is it, right? It's like a... I don't know what it is. It's a chemical.
It's a chemical. Yeah, it's a chemical.
I know I'm lacking it. I know that. But...
Right. It's a naturally occurring chemical in our bodies.
Sure. So it's like your brain is rewarding you for that, the same way that like pop songs are popular because you know what the chord progression is going to be halfway through it. and your brain is like yes, and you get a
Yes,
little
I like
reward,
this.
and you're like, why am I singing this song I hate? Because that's why.
Yeah.
So I think people like them, and they just. I think it's a thing to just blurt out, oh, this character is such a trope, but I think if you analyze it, most of them are. I mean,
Yeah.
I could look at probably every single one of my characters and be like, it's this trope, it's that trope, it's the other one.
And I
So
think,
I think there's plenty of a place for them. As you know, of course, like anything, you want to put effort into it and you want to do a good job
yes,
to make them interesting and likable and not be like, you know,
a character can be a
just a
trope.
cardboard thing.
Right. A character can be a trope and still be a great, fantastic, wonderful character as long as it's written well, as long as it literally isn't a cardboard cutout. So
Exactly.
the word trope has become, I don't want to say anathema, but it's become attached to something that you want to avoid. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly that I think that that's a wrong way to approach it. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, yeah, this character is this trope, as long as you feel comfortable about the way you wrote that character, that it wasn't, just a cardboard cutout, or it was so one dimensional that no one is going to feel any sort of empathy
Or
or
connection or what I mean,
connection.
and even villains have tropes, and even if they're bad
Yeah.
and evil and you're meant to hate them, like if you do a good job of it, they're still interesting.
Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
still work. Like there is a trope. I gotta be honest. I've been wanting to write this trope for so long, and I still don't know who in my many universes am I going to apply this to. I have some people that I almost think could qualify, but I'm not totally sure. Uh, have you heard of that? There is a trope referred to as the magnificent bastard trope.
Yeah.
Right. I want to write a magnificent bastard so fucking bad, and I almost it can't be the hero because there's too much writing on the hero being a certain way and redeemable and what have you. Like it needs to be a peripheral person.
Yeah.
I just won't want to write. I feel like I'm not good enough yet. I know there's part of it's like I'm not good enough to do this yet. I can't pull it off, but I'm gonna pull it off one day. I swear.
Yeah.
I almost feel like, but I feel like there's reasons why I'm gonna say no. But I almost feel like my Aphrodite character could be a girl, can be a magnificent bastard. I
Sure.
almost feel like she could be it, but I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. All right. But yeah, that is actually a wonderful trope character. Um,
But
it-
that's an example. It is a trope, and people will like, oh, it's so tropey. But people love that
yeah.
character. The character in Game of Thrones, which Liz, don't come at me, fantasy readers. I have not read that book, that series. I want to, but I just haven't. Okay, but did watch the TV shows. Um, and now I'm like, and it's escaping me the character's name, but the character. Yeah. Oh God, my entire memory's a blank now, so people are gonna think I'm like a complete moron.
No, but
Let's just skip this topic. Yeah, I'm going to move on. But there's a magnificent bastard
but no,
character, and that's it. No, because I feel so stupid. I can't even remember the actor's name. Peter Dinklage. Thank you. The
yes,
character that he plays
yes.
is
Oh
a
my,
magnificent bastard type
yes,
character. Like he gets into stuff, but he always is clever enough to get out of it somehow.
and
Like the most dire straits, the guy's always clever enough. He always comes back around. You root for him. You're like, yes. And that's that kind of character. And I want to write that character so bad.
right, and the things that he gets into aren't necessarily the kinds of situations that you would associate with your hero or even your
Right,
anti-hero.
right.
I mean, because a lot of times people go, well, that's just another way of saying your anti-hero. And it's, no, that's an anti-hero could be a magnificent bastard, but it doesn't always mean that a magnificent bastard is an anti-hero.
A lot of times they can be something of a gray man. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
he is. I think he's pretty moral for the most part, that character.
Yeah, he is. It's what makes him stand out. But he does some morally ambiguous things because he's also a survivor. And that's
Right.
another character that's a trope that is very, very popular, both male and female, the survivor character.
Yes.
Sloane was that trope. She was the survivor. She went through enormously horrific circumstances, but she survived. She persevered. She was that trope character. Jennifer and I, to a certain degree, did our best to write her so that she wouldn't be the Mary Sue kind of survivor. It was especially important in like the closing scene where she fought back against Daniel and was just like, no, my name is Sloane. She refused to do.
She never totally broke. Like they
Right.
had,
She never totally broke. And some people, not a lot, some people did actually complain about that. It's like,
really?
No, yeah, they wanted her to break and become Daniel's
like a shell of herself.
Yeah, love slave.
Huh. I mean, I don't know why I'm surprised, because there's, everybody, there's someone out there that likes everything. I was just like, like, I liked that she didn't break.
Yeah, and
because then how, like, if I feel like we're getting into very spoilery talk over Jasmine.
Yeah.
But as the book resolves itself, like, I'm just thinking, if she breaks, how does she come back from that then?
Right.
Like, what thread have you given us to, like, hang on to by which she could claw her way back?
Yeah, and again, not to get too spoilery, but that was one of the things that when I was reading some reviews from people who said, oh, that's what they expected and wanted. I was like, wait, that would have changed everything about the end of the story. And it would not have even been an HFN. It would have just been bleak. And is that what you wanted from this? Because that was not our intention. Sorry. You read the wrong
sometimes
story.
You are writing to be bleak, but that was not what you were aiming at.
That was not
at the end.
Right. That was not what either Jennifer nor I wanted at the end of Jasmine. So, sorry, that wasn't our story, folks. If that's what you were looking for, better luck next time.
Can I ask you a jerky question?
Sure.
This is unrelated. This is awful of me to do this, because this shit ain't getting written for a while. In A Sinner and Virtue, do you think that Buckeye was broken at the end?
No.
We shall see.
Okay. But
we
if
will
you're asking
get some
me
Buckeye someday in the main
no.
series, I promise.
She, again, bleak as the darkest night, but my heart tells me she's still holding on. There's a part of her, a sliver of her, that's still holding on.
She's still Buckeye in there somewhere.
That's right. Sorry. If your expectation was I was going to say,
I didn't know what you would expect. I don't know how people interpret that. I mean, it was dark. I mean, it's not that I hadn't written dark before, but that was definitely only the second non-HEA thing I had written, which it was intended, because that was the anthology it was supposed to go into. But I was not used to not resolving things in a satisfying way. I mean, I think it's satisfying on some level, but it's still bleak.
Yeah, it's bleak.
Anyway,
it's bleak. And for that anthology, it was bleak enough that it satisfied that criteria. As a reader, though, we all know as writers that our readers are going to take away what they want to take away.
Yes.
And that you put me on the spot as a reader. That was what I took away. And it's part of the reason why I love that story. Make no mistake, it's part of the reason I loved that story, is because even though it ended so bleak, I, as a reader, could draw my own conclusions and take away that.
And decide maybe something will happen later.
That's right. That's right. Well, I don't know about you, but I think we've probably discussed this.
I think it's a pretty good discussion here on these. The idea of where do our characters come from? How do they materialize? Right, and
there's no right way or wrong way, and whatever it takes as a writer, for you as a writer, to fully flesh out your characters, as long as that's what you're doing and you're creating those characters that your readers will love, you're doing it right. It doesn't matter how you get it.
We're just trying to get to the end of the damn book. Like,
yeah, exactly. And some of us, it takes a little bit longer than others.
Some of us. Two thumbs pointing at myself. Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eris. As always, this has been wonderful. Again, no spoilers, but our next episode will include a guest speaker.
Yes, I'm very excited to have our first guest speaker. We're going to have to make sure all of our technological jiggery-pokery is set up correctly ahead of time, so there's no nonsense.
Yeah, this will be a first.
To subject anyone else to our nonsense.
Yeah, this will be the first for us, but I am looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun, and I hope the readers will too.
Yes, I'm looking forward to all of our new additional podcasts in 2021.
That's right. Well, again, thank you so much. Have a great night.
All right, and you can find the Not Safe for Work Romance podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at RomanceNSFW. That's RomanceNSFW, all one word. I am on Facebook, where you can follow my fan page or join my private group, Eris Adderley's Home for Wayward Troublemakers. I'm also on Twitter at Eris Adderley, and you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. And all my dirty books are on Amazon, most of them in Kindle Unlimited.
And I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Shane Sterrett, or you can find my group, The House of Sterrett, on Facebook. All of my books can also be found on Amazon, available for Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, and also in paperback. Well, here we are, 2021, first episode in the can. I think this is going to be a good year. I think
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to it.
We brought up self-flagellation earlier, and I'm going to go do that and attempt to finish this book.
There you go. All right. Have a great evening.
You too, Shane.
All right.